The basic yoga technique is meditation, not sitting in a fancy posture. The foundational posture of yoga is described as one that is steady and easy. So the real yoga posture means to sit, stand, move, do whatever we are doing in a state of steady easefulness from a steady, balanced foundation. And meditation is all about cultivating that medi state, that state of being centered, balanced, integrated, in which we can act with the utmost skillfulness possible for us in any given situation. A state in which our awareness is clear, so we are able to act with unimpeded access to the pilot light of our conscience. So meditation is the foundational yoga practice technique. But when we talk about yoga practice, it's important to recognize that practice is not just about technique. In the Yoga Sutra, one of the most important foundation texts of the yoga tradition, yoga practice is defined very beautifully as the effort to foster steadiness. An effort to foster steadiness that is long-term, uninterrupted, attended to with genuine presence and a spirit of dedication and devotion. And then it can become well-grounded, well-rooted, so it can actually bloom and grow and bring fruits. So yoga practice, long-term, without break, constant, attended to with real genuine presence and dedication. What does that tell me? It tells me yoga practice doesn't just mean doing some techniques sometimes. Yoga practice is an always and everywhere, all the time affair. And consequently, there are practical ways that we can practice all the time. And in the Yoga Sutra, we get this distilled into this magnificent sutra, the 33rd sutra of the first chapter, in which Patanjali, the rishi who gives us the Yoga Sutra, he lays out these 4 ways of responding in response to 4 types of situation that we can find ourselves in as we go through life. This is typical of Patanjali's jaw-dropping genius to distill vast possibilities into very condensed forms. So there's so many types of situations we can find ourselves in life. How can he distill it only into 4 ways of responding? Well, let's see what he says. Patanjali says, when you find yourself in an agreeable situation, a good space, a space in which there is good vibration, be friendly, be open, be receptive. So when things are agreeable, be friendly, be open. Sounds like pretty good advice so far to me. Then he says, what about sometimes in life you're not always in a good space. Sometimes you're in a difficult space. There is suffering, there is pain. Patanjali says, in such situations, exercise compassion. Sometimes we will see people doing wonderful things. Patanjali says, if you see such situations, let it lift you up, let it fill you with joy. And sometimes you will see people doing things that are terrible. You will encounter horror, terror, injustice. In such situations, practice steadiness. Can you meet that situation from the most stable foundation so you can respond with skillfulness? I would love to live in a neighborhood, in a country, in a world where everybody was doing their best to practice that. So here Patanjali gives us a prescription for how to practice yoga all the time. When things are agreeable, be friendly, open, accepting, welcoming. When things are difficult, be compassionate. When things are beautiful, let it inspire you. When things are terrible, don't let it rob you of your center, but rather can you take, as it were, a bird's eye view. Engage with the situation, but as if from a distance. So you don't get swamped in it, but you can actually navigate your way through it skillfully. So here Patanjali gives us this beautiful prescription of how to practice all the time, in all situations. And at the same time, in his genius, he gives us a description of somebody who is established in yoga. So if it's the case that whenever I'm in a good space, I'm friendly and open, whenever I encounter pain, suffering, difficulty, compassion just overflows spontaneously from me. Whenever I see people doing wonderful things, without fail, instantaneously, it lifts me up, fills me with inspiration and joy. And whenever I see terrifying, horrifying, unjust situations, I'm unshaking, able to meet it with great equipoise and skillfulness, then I know I'm established in yoga, and my chitta, the whole realm of my conscious awareness, is clear. I'm able to operate and heed the guidance of my conscience without impediment. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not always able to respond in those ways. For sure, sometimes when things are agreeable, I am friendly and open. Sometimes when I encounter suffering, I do manage to exercise compassion. Sometimes when I see wonderful things, it does lift me up. And sometimes in the face of things that I find very potentially disturbing, I do manage to stay steady. But at other times, no. Sometimes lovely things come along and I just let them pass me by. I don't really accept them. I'm not so friendly to them. Sometimes when I encounter suffering in myself or others, I don't feel compassion overflowing. Sometimes I see wonderful things, and rather than be lifted up by them, I feel a little bit kind of cast down that I'm doing so badly in comparison, for example. Or sometimes if I see something terrible, it shakes me. I do feel some contraction, and I notice the diminishment in my capacity to respond skillfully. So this tells me I'm not established in yoga. So what to do? So then potentially advocates that we take recourse to the basic practice technique of meditation, and that we include some meditative support in our day-to-day. For example, at the beginning of the day and at the beginning of the evening, let's take a little bit of time to dive inside into the meditative space so we can then go out and meet life from a more congruent foundation. So sometimes people think, why would I want to spend time sitting still doing nothing? So in the yoga tradition, they use this beautiful image of an archer. The archer, when drawing the bow back, brings the arrow away from its intended target. And the archer has to do that if the arrow is going to fly with power, precision, and purpose towards its intended destination. So similarly with meditation, if we want to go out into the world to act with power and purpose and precision and enact the things that are really our deep longings, we give ourselves a much better chance of doing that if we go out into the world from a strong foundation. Another way we can think of it is kind of like tuning the instruments of a great orchestra. However skilled and accomplished all the different orchestra members are, if they don't first tune up, they won't be able to play a beautiful movement, a beautiful symphony. Similarly, we have all these amazing instrumental powers, the powers of our senses, the powers of our bodies, the powers of our minds, all these different things. If we give them the chance to come into congruence, togetherness, to the medi state, then it's like they can come into a state of attunement, at one-ment, and we can go out into action from a place of greater cohesion. And this is a platform for greater skillfulness and efficiency in all the things that we do. And so if it's the case that we're not always responding as skillfully as we might imagine we could do, let's take the chance to enhance our potential for doing that by taking recourse to meditation technique. And what is the basic technique in yoga? We give the powers of our awareness, all these different instrumental powers of our senses, our bodies, our minds, something to gather around, something to orient towards, an object to focus on. It's called an alambana, a support in the Sanskrit. So we give our sense powers, our mind, our awareness, this support to help it come together, to help all those different instrumental powers come into attunement. And Patanjali encodes, in a few sutras, 34 to 39, a whole ocean of meditation option techniques. And the first thing he mentions is we can use the movements and retentions of the life force through the agency of the breath as our alambana, as our object of support, as our point of focus. The breath and the life force, as long as we're alive, we always have it. It's always here. It's to hand. We don't need to go anywhere. We don't need any special equipment. We have everything we need inside, right here, right now. And this is one of the beautiful things about yoga. It teaches us, it trains us to recognize that we have all we need. Yoga does not ask us to become anything that we are not. It's about remembering all of who we already really are. And so we can use as our object for meditation practice the movements of the breath. And so there are thousands of ways we can do this. There are all sorts of ways, with the way the breath flows in and out of the body, sensations associated with that. We can feel the breath moving in one nostril and out the other, then the reverse. We can feel the breath moving up and down and around the spine, for example. So many options, but very simply, we could just begin by allowing ourselves, for example, to experience the easy movement of the breath in and out of the body through the nostrils. And we just allow ourselves to tune into that. So here I am, and I'm focusing on the easy movement of the breath in and out of the body. As I focus on the object, in this instance, the easy movement of the breath in and out of the body, it might be the case that after a while, or before long at all, my awareness jumps somewhere else. And sometimes we might think, oh, that means I can't meditate. I can't empty my mind. I can't focus on one thing. No, that means we're just practicing. When we notice we've gone somewhere else, we just invite the awareness back to the point of focus. In this instance, in this example, the breath. Okay, I'm focusing on the breath. I'm noticing it. It might go off somewhere else again. I bring it back. So a meditation practice is about coming back to the center. When patiently, persistently, we keep inviting the awareness back to the center, many wonderful things happen. For one, we may notice the state of our awareness. We may realize, whoa, my awareness is not so settled. It's flitting here and there, seemingly all over the place. But as I practice with more regularity, I realize it's not really all over the place. It tends to jump to many familiar old haunts. So I'm thinking, for example, about things I like and dislike, things I need to do, things I could have or should have done in the past. So I'm thinking about the future, thinking about the past, I'm thinking about these desires, these things I want to avoid. We each have our own circuit. Of course, the mind can jump all over the place, but there are certain areas it tends to jump to a lot. But as we practice meditation, it gives us the chance to take inventory of the field of our awareness, of our mind. And we keep inviting the awareness back. And so this can give us a chance to really apprehend the real state of our mental and psychic field. And in and of itself, this practice is hygienic. Because once we become aware of how flitting and sometimes silly and ill-disciplined our mental patterns are, we can sometimes be a bit embarrassed. And so in and of ourselves, that will start to be a little bit more focused. Once we see for ourselves, I think I can change that. There's no need to be thinking about those things. We can kind of rehabilitate our capacity to be more focused, to be more concentrated. Another thing that can happen as we start to meditate, to practice meditation, to invite our awareness back to the center, sometimes we'll get into a more concentrated state of awareness. Now, Patanjali has already described this in Sutra 17 and 18. He talks about how meditation works to transform ourselves. So, I don't know if you remember, when I was a boy in the 1980s, there was a cartoon on the TV called The Transformers, and the theme song said, "Transformers, robots in disguise." So, we could change that to say, "Human beings, yogis in disguise." Well, what do I mean by that? So the Transformers, they were robots, but they were also like buildings or cars or boats, whatever. One of my school friends had a couple of Transformer toys. So you could transform it from its vehicle shape to its robot shape. When you did that, you didn't lose anything. The robot was already inside the car or the skyscraper or the boat, whatever it was. Similarly, here we are as a human being. We have our habits, our tendencies, but when we invite all the powers of our awareness to come into congruence, cohesion, then we can experience the yogi who is waiting to emerge inside. We can experience ourselves in that state of concentrated meditative awareness. So it might happen that as we're practicing, we focus, and through the effort of focusing, we become focused. The way this works is also elaborated in the second chapter of the Yoga Sutra, in it's more elaborated. But basically the idea is, yoga is always practical. It works with our natural tendency to be curious. So we're focusing on something, and when we start focusing, it kindles our curiosity. So I'm focusing on the breath, I start to tune to the breath, and I start to notice more. I notice qualities of the breath, for example, that I wouldn't be able to tune into, I wouldn't be able to perceive if my awareness was operating in its ordinary day-to-day level, externally. But when I turn all the powers of awareness in, then I'm able to apprehend subtler things. And what does this do to my curiosity? It rouses it further. And so the yoga practitioner is always trained to work from gross to subtle. And so I start to enter a subtler realm of inquiry. And in this subtler space of inquiry, my focus can become more refined. Perhaps here again, my awareness might jump off somewhere else, but no, I'm focusing on the breath, and I'm allowing myself to experience the breath, or whatever the object of meditative focus is, this subtle level. And I'm concentrating on that object. I'm turning all the powers of my awareness gently, in a relaxed way, to focus on that thing. When I keep concentrating on the object, I'm concentrating, and then I can emerge a situation in which I am now concentrated. And once my awareness becomes concentrated, the meditative state of flowing awareness can begin to emerge. And when my awareness flows in this congruent, focused, integrated way, it can bring with it this lovely feeling of wholeness, fullness. I'm no longer anywhere else. I'm fully here and now. So we can also get experience of this in activity. For example, if I'm doing something that I care about, I feel it's valuable, I enjoy it, I give myself to the activity. So for example, I experienced this as a child playing sports and dancing. All sorts of activities we could activate or access this state in. But it's the type of experience where time kind of falls away. I'm fully here, and being fully here, there is no space for regret, there is no space for anything else. The moment is its own completion. And when the moment is its own completion, all other desires subside and fall away, if only for a moment. So similarly with internal meditation practice, the difference being that we don't need to be doing some grand external thing. We don't need a particular stimulus. Rather, what happens is this object of support has served to help us encounter in a closer, more confidential, intimate way, the power of our own focused awareness. So we're focusing on that object, then we become focused. Then we can even become absorbed in the object. We're absorbed in what we're doing. Everything else is falling away. But then eventually, perhaps, the object itself falls away and we get the experience of just our own pure awareness. We taste, for example, for a moment, the flavor of conscious experience. And we're fully there. And when we get fully into this focused state, we don't want to be anywhere else. How does this feel? It feels ananda in Sanskrit. It is full. It is blissful. But it's not like sometimes people translate ananda as blissful, but it's not like bliss as opposed to non-bliss. It's not joy and sorrow. It's a joyfulness that's beyond the pairs of opposites. It's its own fullness. Now, where and how did I experience that fullness? It emerged within my own being. It wasn't dependent on an external thing. It was an emergent property of my own focused, concentrated, channeled awareness. And so the magic thing that can happen with this practice is that when I experience this fullness, just by inviting the powers of my own awareness to come together in an integrated, balanced, sustained, focused way, I start to rehabilitate my understanding of who I am. My sense of self changes because I realize this state of blissfulness and the associated peace and calm and serenity and wholeness is not outside of myself, but it's something within. And so when we practice consistently, it's like we give ourselves access, we become more attuned to, more familiar with this inner independent sanctuary. So regardless of what is happening in the external world, regardless of how lovely or terrible the external situation is, we have access and we have a certain proximity to an internal realm of deep peacefulness that can then help us navigate the externals much more smoothly. And if they're joyful, we can relish them more easily without becoming so attached to them. And if they're terrible, we can navigate them more patiently, a little bit more lightly. Doesn't mean we won't feel the joy and the sorrow in the external realm, but we will most likely be able to navigate them a little bit more skillfully. So meditation has many, many benefits. But just because the ultimate aim of meditation is to recognize our pure essential consciousness, it does not preclude the reality that meditation practice also has many, many practical worldly benefits. As we repeatedly, regularly remind ourselves of that steady, easeful, calm, integrated state or quality that is within ourselves, it bolsters us to be able to navigate life more easefully. And it also serves as a kind of barometer. So, for example, if at the beginning of the day and the beginning of the evening, regularly, I invite myself to come into the medi state, it's like I give myself a reference. I've invited myself as best I can into a state of being centered and balanced. And so then as I go about my worldly life, when I start to come off balance, I can notice much more easily because I have that reference of what it feels like to be steady and balanced, fresh in my awareness. And this is one of the ideas why we need to meditate regularly, ideally a couple of times a day. Because the world will constantly be inundating us with all sorts of impressions which will have various influences on us. As they accumulate, we can become more and more swayed by them. However, if we take regular recourse to the experience of what is known in Sanskrit as samadhi, that integrated meditative awareness that can emerge in that state of calm absorption, that will also begin to accumulate. And the impression that comes from samadhi, the yogic masters tell us, it imprints in a very special way because it is a whole system experience. So when I go out in the world and all these things come in and I have all these different actions and consequent impressions, a lot of the time I'm acting in a somewhat partial way. I get some impression in through my sense of hearing, through my sense of sight. I'm doing something, but I'm not fully into it. I'm receiving some information, but I'm also receiving something else. Oftentimes we don't act in a completely cohesive way. And so these impressions have a certain partiality to them. And partiality it has a certain tenacity, but in the face of genuine wholeness, it just dissolves. And so this is the idea of the great power of samadhi. When we regularly keep taking recourse to that subtle internal space, we can soak our whole being more in those refreshing, purifying, and vivifying waters of samadhi, of calm, of peacefulness, of blissfulness. And so we can then go out into the world in a state of greater attunement, at-one-ment, congruence and cohesion, so it's easier to act skillfully. There are also further benefits of meditation. I could go on at length about this, but a couple other things I'd like to mention here. And one is that when we start regularly meditating, it's great mental and psychic hygiene. Because we're constantly exposed to all these different ideas, many of which are not particularly healthy, accurate, or truthful, it can be really helpful once or twice a day to give ourselves the chance to just clear out the detritus, clear away all that trash at the surface, and settle into the deep. And what happens when we settle into the deep? What will often happen then, initially when we start to meditate, our awareness might pop out to these familiar things at the surface. But then as we keep going inside, what's likely to happen, and this can happen from the first meditation as well, things will pop up from our subconscious. And as we keep meditating, we will come into closer contact with ourself. We will go into the dark lands of the shadow inside. But the equipoise, the calm, and the sense of wholeness is going to empower us, embolden us, strengthen us to do the work of confronting and navigating our own shadow. So it's psychically hygienic. We're going to almost definitely discover or uncover within ourselves things that we might have preferred not to, things that we were previously blind to. This can be very unsettling. But yoga begins when we own, acknowledge, recognize that we are not in a state of yoga. We are not totally integrated. Sometimes we do things and we don't really want to do them. We do them anyway. Why? So as we meditate, we're going to become more familiar with our depths, the beauty, the peace, the serenity that is at the core of our being. But between the surface and that deep core that is constantly steady, that is the pure witness consciousness, we're going to uncover a lot of deep down dirt and accumulated trash. And meditation gives us the opportunity to start bringing that into the light of centered awareness, in which it can be dealt with, in which it can be cleansed away. Not that all the cleaning will happen only in the meditation practice, though it's an important part of it. But once it comes into our awareness, it will likely happen that in our day-to-day, we will also get opportunities to then act in ways that prove to ourselves that we are leaving behind some of those habits that have been lurking in our shadow, waiting to block and impede our residing in a state of greater peacefulness. As yoga says, that peacefulness, that balance, that serenity is within us. So when we're practicing to cultivate peace, we are asking to bring to the surface those habits and tendencies that we have been harboring and carrying that would get in the way of our continuing and sustained peacefulness. When we meditate, we give ourselves a chance to let that happen. And when those things start to emerge, it can be rather unsettling, which is why we keep doing the practice. We keep taking recourse to that time inside. Now, sometimes people say, wait a minute, so you're going to make me dependent on doing this technique? Well, old saying, if you don't have time to meditate 1 hour a day, you need to meditate 2 hours a day. The idea is that when we are regular in our practice, it will not be a burden to keep practicing. Rather, the practice will generate a self-propelling momentum. But that takes time to establish. Sometimes people say, for example, 90 days. Morning and evening, unbroken for 90 days. If you miss a day, you go back to zero. But if you do it for 90 days, then you'll really know the benefit for yourself. People say different numbers of days, but from personal experience, if you do it twice a day for 90 days, I'm pretty confident that you will know for yourself. And that's another very important thing in yoga. It's a DIY project. Nobody else can do the practice for us. We can learn from each other. Satsang, coming together to explore truth, is a very important part of the yoga method. But the work with technique, the inquiry, we have to take responsibility for our own lives. We have to take responsibility for our own practices. But if we manage to muster the discipline and the steadiness to regularly keep inviting ourselves into the medi state, that state will become strong within us and it will bolster all our other efforts. So meditation is the basic foundational yoga technique, but it is also the technique that is valid and useful from the beginning of our practice all the way to the end. It's for our whole life long. And as in all other yoga techniques, we are always trained to work from gross to subtle. So meditation will challenge us. Once we get comfortable focusing on one thing, remember, it works with our curiosity. So we can then channel our subtle, refined awareness into subtler and subtler realms. And so give ourselves subtler supports that allow us to further refine all the lenses of our awareness and bring them into greater clarity and greater congruence, so we get that clearer, easier access to the light of conscience. And when we're able to live our day-to-day life as the embodiment of the guidance of conscience, then we're able to sleep in peace at the end of every day. And if we're able to do that day after day after day after day, when that day comes and the inevitable death that is waiting for us all sooner or later comes, we'll be able to die in peace. And that is the crowning achievement of the yogic method, is that we will leave this life feeling ready and fulfilled. Because what are we here for? According to yoga, we are here for consciousness to recognize its fullness. And meditation is one of the great ways to help us do that.